And now on to Giora Eiland. Giora, again, someone to many of us needs no introduction, is a former head of the National Security Council, and he served in that position from January of 2004 to June 2006 under Prime Ministers Sharon and Olmert. Before that he held senior positions in the IDF, reaching the rank of Major General. Today he is in the private sector, leading strategic projects on a national scale for a number of governments, and as a consultant to the defense industry sector here in Israel. Giora is also known as an original thinker. As Ari Shavit wrote in Haaretz in 2012, there is no area in which his thinking is square or conventional. There is no matter on which his insights are bland and routine. So we'll look forward to hearing from you on that. A few words before Giora speaks. Giora will speak about what Israel should be doing in the face of the nuclearizing Iran. And to me, what I would think we would be interested in hearing from you, Giora, is potentially less about whether what is emerging is a good or bad deal, and maybe even less about what Israel should be doing to influence the terms of the deal, a question that was extremely relevant on April 2nd, but as we get closer to the deadline on June 25th, may be less relevant now, and more focus on the question of what would happen the day after an agreement. On the assumption, which may or may not become the case, that there will be a deal, whether June 30th or slightly afterwards, on the assumption that Israel will not be fully satisfied with that deal, what should Israel do the day after? For example, should Israel fight the deal in Congress, try to get a 2/3 vote in the Senate and House of Representatives to kill the deal? Should Israel continue, according to foreign reports, cyber activities and sabotage to hold back the program? Should Israel attack? Should Israel, as Emily alluded to, seek understandings from the U.S. and military guarantees? Should Israel in some way step up its cooperation with other regional states? Should Israel try to act inside Iran, work with the Iranian opposition, or somehow influence the internal politics of Iran, or some other kinds of options into the mix? So, Giora, thank you so much.
All the above. I'll try to analyze very briefly the Israeli positions, I would say the changes in the Israeli policy vis-a-vis this matter along the past decade. And I will begin in 2004 as the first benchmark, number one, because it was a long time ago, so probably don't know what happened or don't remember what happened there, so I can tell you whatever I want. But also because at that time I was official, so I had, let's say, a little better insight in regard to Israeli policy. But I will mention 4 points or 4 times that should be discussed, and we will be able to see the changes in the policy, and based on that, maybe to make prediction in regard to the future. And this is September, if you want, 2004, September 2012, December 2013 as the 3rd point, and the last few months as the 4th, as Emily gave some insights about some changes in the Israeli, at least, rhetorics. The first sentence is that I don't fully agree with Emily that Israel always preferred the diplomacy. Because in 2004, it was the Israeli policy, by the way, it was the American policy, that diplomacy is not really needed, because there are very clear UN resolutions that actually demand that Iran will take certain steps or will be forced to take certain steps in order to fully comply with the NPT, including the additional protocol. And the only thing that has to be done is to demand that they will do it. And at that time, the Americans were against any dialogue with Iran, whether it is direct or indirect. As far as they were concerned, Iran was part of the axis of evil. They are bad, and bad people have to do what they are demanded to do, and there is no room for negotiation. The Americans at that time were very reluctant from the European initiative led by the French, by the way, the French, the British, and the German, that, not the German, the Italian, the French, and no, it was the German, the French, and the British, to resume some kind of semi-official dialogue with Iran. The Americans were against it, and Israel naturally was very close to the Americans, that no deal can be discussed. And I believe that certain good opportunities that were relevant or might be relevant at that time actually missed, including some interesting Russian proposals that both the Americans and Israelis said, we are not interested in any deal. The Iranians are bad, they have to do what they know that they have to do, and that's it. So this was the Israeli policy, at least at that time. If we jump to 2012, in autumn 2012, the behavior of the Israeli government or the Israeli prime minister, and to a certain extent also the defense minister, was that time has come for Israel not only to rely on diplomacy, but actually to take unilateral military step in order to stop Iran. And as far as they were concerned, it was at least the right timing. First, because at that time there was no real resumption of negotiation with Iran, so there is no negotiation, no real prospect for any reasonable political deal at that time. It was after the release of certain reports that did verify that Iran continues to violate the UN resolutions. It was clear that the Iranians are moving forward, building another sites or some other nuclear sites that were not supposed to be done. It was before the election in America, and George Bush was still, Obama was the president, but it was before an election that gave the feeling that maybe some change might occur, or at least he might find himself very reluctant from fighting against Israel before the election. And from the professional point of view, it seemed to be a relevant window of opportunity because the Iranians at that time did not accomplish some of their activities to protect some of the nuclear sites. So the window of opportunities from both the operational point of view, but above all from the political point of view, seemed to be then in September or in autumn 2012. And the decisions that were made by the Israeli Prime Minister and the instructions that were given by him and all the expression that he made in public and not in public within the Israeli security establishment and with other visitors that visit Israel created the impression that he was more than ready to carry out this unilateral military strike. Now, whether it was a real and sincere one or it was only a tactical move in order to cause a pressure, I really don't know. And I'm not sure that he himself knows very well what was his real intent. Nevertheless, it did create a quite positive impact because when a resumption of the talks began with Iran, and whenever they understood that an Israeli military strike is a credible option, then there was much more incentives to the European countries to support sanctions vis-à-vis Iran, because if there are sanctions and if it is successful, it might persuade the crazy Israelis to give up the military strike. So this was at least the policy, the way that it could be understood by people who did meet the Prime Minister at that time, and in a way even by some of the Israeli officials or those who belong to the security establishment. Of course, there was a little tension in regard to how to create a credible military option on one hand and not to cross certain line on the other hand, because whenever we speak about a military option against Iran, it is not a single airstrike that can be prepared confidentially and carried out only by, let's say, 8 brave pilots like Amos Yadlin, as they did back in 81. In Iraq, it is something that Israel has to be well prepared against different kind of possible retaliation, whether it is from Hezbollah or directly from Iran. So if you want to be ready to carry out such a military strike in short time, not in some few months, but tomorrow, it means that many other preparations have to be made. If you begin this preparation, number one, it does have a very clear cost, including economic cost. On the other hand, it might create certain tension and certain, I would say, even more than tension that you don't want to create. So there was an attempt to find the right balance between the need to make a very credible military option on one hand, but not to cross certain line that might be later even irreversible, because someone might take you too seriously and might begin even some preemptive action against you. Anyway, this option, whether it was, or this opportunity, whether it was real or not necessarily real, actually disappeared the moment after the American election and after a real serious negotiation with Iran began, because from that time it was clear that a real chance has to be given to the political negotiation, and from that time, I fully agree with Emily, the policy of everyone, including of Israel, was let's give a chance to the political solution. And of course, everybody or every side has some different expectation, what is the possible outcome and what is the different definition of good deal vis-a-vis bad deal. And it brings me to the third point, and this is December 2013. At that time, the 5+1 and Iran reached the interim agreement, and this interim agreement gives an official recognition to something that so far, or until that time, was very different from the American point of view. As far as I remember, until that time, or maybe until short time before that, the American official policy was very similar to the Israeli one in regard to the most important matter, and this is the question of enrichment. Is Iran entitled to enrich uranium, yes or no? And the Israeli and the Americans, and in a way the European positions during the end of the previous decades was very clear and very similar. And everybody understood that the most important matter, if you want to produce a nuclear bomb, especially if you focus on the uranium track, then the key capability is the capability to enrich uranium. If you cannot enrich uranium, even if you have many other facilities and you can do a lot of other things, this key capability is the most important one. So if you do not have such a capability and you don't have any control of the cycle, it means that actually you cannot produce a bomb. So the official policy of everyone was that zero enrichment is the right policy. And Iran can do many other things. They can build or buy reactors. They can use technology that is made by others, but they should not have the ability to independently enrich uranium. Officially, in 2013, the United States, even in the words of the president, they did say, yes, Iran can enrich uranium and even has the right to enrich uranium. So this Iranian continuous violation that began in 2003 or 4 actually was recognized as something legitimate. Now, this creates a real split between the American position and the Israeli one, because the Israeli policy continues to state that only zero enrichment can be acceptable. And the Americans said enrichment can be permitted. Now let's talk about the details. How many centrifuges, what kind of quantities, to which level, a lot of other technical questions, but the Americans did cross a line that was part of the, let's say, understandings between the two countries. And from that moment, we could see a real dispute between the United States and Israel, because no matter what the Americans were ready to offer, as far as Netanyahu, it was part of what he called a very bad deal. Now, from the moment that he chose to go in this independent way, Israel began to be in a real offside situation. All the world, from Iran until the United States and all the European countries and other countries that continue to negotiate with Iran, said, let's reach a deal. Part of this deal means that Iran will be able to enrich uranium, and now let's talk about many details, while Israel continued to say an enrichment is not relevant or cannot be acceptable. More than that, we even made our positions more extreme, and we said that if you want to reach a deal with Iran, it has to be a comprehensive deal, not necessarily focus only on the nuclear matter, because Iran continues to do many other bad things, continue to support terror, support Hezbollah. So if you reach a deal with Iran, it has to include many other things. Some people even say, including Iran has to be forced to recognize that Israel has the right to exist, and of course to seize all the support that they give to Hamas Hezbollah, Islamic Jihad, and others, and it was clear that it was a very, very extreme position that could not be served as any real starting point for any reasonable deal that Iran might accept. So from that moment, a real split began to occur. Now, some people said, okay, there could be a dispute in the very political level, and the prime minister and the president continues to fight, and later on, including the visit or the speech that Netanyahu gave in Congress, all of them are part of a political dispute that in a way it is part of the game. However, if we go down to the professional level, Israelis and Americans continue to cooperate on the Iranian deal and do it in a very, let's say, a professional way, ignore this political noise above them. Well, that's not correct. And sometimes we make a confusion between intelligence cooperation and other kind of professional cooperation. Yes, whenever we speak about intelligence, as far as I know, the good relationship between the two countries continue to exist in regard to every important matter, including in regard to what is happening in Iran. So both countries continue to share intelligence in the very same way, despite of the political disputes. But whenever you go to the professional details of a possible agreement, the Israeli officials that had to negotiate with the Americans and with the Europeans in regard to the details of the agreement with Iran were kept in a very uncomfortable situation because they were committed to the Israeli political position that said that a good deal that we as Israelis can support is a deal which is very, very far from any other possible content of a deal that was discussed between the others and the Iranian. And since the Israeli officials were committed to a political position that was a non-starter for any real professional discussion, they were marginalized along the way. And the depths of the discussions that used to be made between Israelis and Americans in regard to these delicate matters, what are the possible details of, let's say, a good deal, this kind of cooperation, I don't say that it is fully ceased, but it lost a lot of its credibility because of the political dispute that could not be, I would say, could not be ignored. And it brings me to the last change in the Israeli policy, as we could see it in the past few months, although officially no one said, okay, our policy that until a year and a half ago said that any deal is a bad deal, and we are demanding far-reaching additional demands, and now we can agree to something, let's say, more moderate or more soft. No one said that we changed the policy, but in practical terms, we can see a change. Now, why we can see a change, I can only suggest some possible explanations. First, we do understand that the train has already left the station in regard to the American commitment and determination to try to reach a deal. So even if we cause a lot of noises and problems and obstacles, we cannot stop this process. So a deal, if the Americans decide to make it, they will achieve it. Number two, it is maybe better to return to the old pattern of dialogue in which we do talk to the Americans and say, okay, we might disagree about the principles, including the principles of enrichment, yes or not, but we have to respect your decision. And within this framework, let's try to agree together about some red lines, a new red line, but a real red line. Let's agree together under these considerations what could be a reasonable deal. And this is a much more, I would say, productive approach. I can say that if I go back to the previous point, to the December 2013, when Wendy Sherman came to Israel in order to explain the Prime Minister why the interim deal that was made was not that bad, I believe that she was ready to hear a lot of Israeli reservations if the reservations were made under this concept which said, okay, you decided to reach a deal, we don't like it, but we respect it. You, the Americans, decided to let Iran enrich uranium. We don't like it, but we respect it. Under these assumptions, let's agree together what should be the real red lines. At that time, the Americans were much more ready, I believe, to listen, and maybe we could, in a way, force them not to go so far the way that they did. Anyway, at least today, I believe the Prime Minister understands that this approach is probably more productive than the other one. The third maybe possible reason for such a slight change is that we probably begin to understand that the military option is an option only if and when there is no deal. So if there is a deal, or even if there is a serious negotiation about the deal, because there might be another delay after this June, as long as this political process continues, we lose some of our credibility to military option. So we can, what we could achieve in 2012, we might not be able to achieve right now. And above all, I think that we begin to understand that between us and Iran, the relationship are not necessarily of a type of a zero-sum game, which means whatever is good for Iran is bad for us, and whatever is bad for them is good for us, or vice versa. And we begin to understand that, just as Obama said, that no deal is not necessarily a better situation than, let's say, a reasonable deal. And no deal means that maybe Iran will continue to suffer economically. And no deal means that the people of Iran will continue to suffer. But no deal also means that Iran will be free to continue to take some actions in regard to the nuclear project that will increase the threat to the future of Israel. So maybe between a perfect deal and a bad deal, maybe there is a way to try to influence those that can be influenced to reach a reasonable deal, whatever this term means. This is, I believe, more practical approach, and I think that it is, in a way, more and more understood in Washington. Last point before I turn to the future. Some people ask why the Israeli Prime Minister was so blunt, so aggressive against the Americans about that. Again, the peak was in the end of 2013, but even before that and along 2014. And I believe that beside the direct reasons, or beside the fact that the Prime Minister really believes that the Americans should do something different from what they are doing, there is an indirect reason, and this is the Palestinian issue. Why? Because in 2010 and 11, there were talks about some kind of an American-Israeli deal. The Americans will solve the Iranian problem in a way that Israel can be happy, and in return, Israel will have to move forward and to reach a deal with the Palestinians, will reach a final agreement with the Palestinians. This was a kind of an American-Israeli deal. Some headlines in the Israeli newspapers were Bushar for Itzar, for example, and things like this. Let the Americans take care for the Iranian, and in return, Israel will show much more flexibility on the Iranian trade. Now, Netanyahu did not want to be perceived as someone who thanks the Americans for being able to solve the Iranian problem, because if he does, it means that this is going to be immediately backfire and he will have to respond in different way. He prefers to be in a situation that he is very disappointed, that he is mad with the Americans, that he does not owe them anything. On the contrary, they do certain things that risk Israel, so he is not committed to pay to them in any other field like the Palestinian one. This is a possible political/psychological explanation, but I find it something that might be relevant. Last point is what is expected right now. First, despite all that I said, I don't think that a deal between Iran and the others will be achieved this week or next week, whenever it has to be done. Of course, in a week I might be a total fool, but I think, and the reason is this: when they did agree on the principles 2 months ago, 3 months ago, whenever it was, there was an immediate Iranian interpretations of what was agreed. that was very different from the way that the American officials presented their explanations to the Congress. So there is certain commitments of the administration, the way that it was presented to the Congress, which is different from the Iranian interpretation. And the gap is not very small. It is a significant gap. Now, I don't think that the Iranian will change their view, especially because some of their interpretations were made publicly by their president, not only the foreign minister. And I think that the administration cannot go very far forward beyond what he already said and the line that he portrayed when he presented these principles to the Congress. So the gap is in a way wider than the way that it is perceived. It is in a way a little similar to some of the talks between Israelis and the Palestinians, that someone who observed the situation from outside said, well, it seems that you agreed about many things, so the gap between both sides are very narrow and it can be bridged easily. Usually when you come to real direct discussions, you'll see it is not as simple as it is seen. So I don't think that a deal is going to be made a week from now, but number one, I don't know, and number two, of course, I might be wrong. So I believe that there will be a continuous attempt, and contrary to, again, to the past, I don't think that no deal is necessarily a bad thing for the time being, as long as there is some time, some limit also to this. What will be the Israeli policy? I believe that we will prefer to have, and I believe that it is happening in these very days. There is much better constructive, confidential talks between Israel and others about that. The volume of disputes, of public disputes, are much lower. I don't think that we will try to gain a support in the Congress against the administration, but we'll do it with the administration. I don't think that we will use the military options in the near future, and anything else that can be done in a confidential way, if such attempts happened in the past, I believe that they will continue to occur, because if you don't take any responsibility for anything, then, and it is effective, then why not to do it? So I believe that we will get too used to, let's say, much more diplomatic dialogue between the parties rather than to attack them again and again. I don't think that we will return to the rhetoric of December 2013.
Thank you very much, Giora.